Tá. Então, tá gravando, então... Eu não sei se eu tô torcendo para eles entrarem ou não, porque eu sinto falta de falar em português, eu só fico falando em inglês só, eu nunca falo em português.
Sim, Vou aproveitar.
Aproveitar. Mas e aí, gente, como que foi a semana aí? Tipo, o que vocês fizeram, o que vocês aprenderam? O que você acha de você começar, Thiago?
Pode ser, sem problema. Estou só arrumando a câmera aqui, porque essa câmera aqui do notebook, como vocês podem ver, ela
Por
não
isso,
tem...
onde você tá? Que é um lugar meio escuro, parece que tem um fundo meio amadeirado.
Na verdade, é um piso mesmo, é azulejo que tem ali atrás. Mas eu estou em Minas Gerais, né? Estou em Lavras e estou... Aqui é meu quarto, na verdade.
Entendi.
Aí eu só preciso trocar a câmera aqui para ficar mais claro, né? Vou colocar no celular, que é mais fácil.
Sim.
Não parece que eu estou me escondendo aqui, velho.
Não, mas tranquilo também.
Pronto, agora foi.
Entendeu?
Mas da semana passada para cá eu fiquei mais olhando o HackMD lá que você fez. Principalmente eu assisti mais os vídeos da primeira reunião e da segunda, né? Eu consegui terminar os dois. E aí quero ver se eu termino, porque o que eu entrei foi o quarto, se eu não me engano, né? E aí eu preciso assistir mais um e dar uma lida nos materiais. E me ambientando também em tudo que tá rolando aqui para chegar talvez na próxima reunião já mais por dentro dos assuntos também.
Você vai ver que sempre vai ter muito assunto. Talvez seja até um pouco difícil de acompanhar, mas sempre vai ter fluxo de assunto. Hey, Raul. How are you doing?
Melting here. It's super hot. Are you doing, guys?
Yeah, me and Danilo are facing the same situation. We are on the middle of the Amazon right now and doing some heat acclimatation.
Yeah, but probably there is super humid. This is like dry, like 42 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was seeing the news. It seems that the Northern Hemisphere is suffering a lot this year. A lot.
Yeah, every year is worse. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to. On the Amazon too, it seems that every day the smoke is worse. I mean, it's a thing that me and Danilo, we were sort of outraged yesterday because it was super smog here. Yeah.
Smoke? Smoke isn't like by contamination or something, or?
No, due to deforestation. Actually, the two most polluted places on Earth in terms of air pollution was 300 kilometers from here because of the burns, the forest burning. And I guess that's one of the most motivations of why we are on this ecosystem, because, I mean, the traditional cities, they are not working for the well-being of humanity. They are actually pushing us towards disaster rather than...
Yeah.
We were doing the round of, let's say... go on, Raul.
No.
Okay. Because I think that maybe we have a half a second delay because, the internet here is a bit... But yeah, we were doing the round of asking ourselves what we were learning and how was the week and what we did do and so on. Tiago was telling that he was waiting through the material and that he is still, let's say, sort of getting hanging because, I mean, it's a lot of things, and he was watching the records and so on. So there was anything else that you would add, Tiago?
No, I just forgot to say the last meeting that I am the co-founder and the prosumer of a CSA model. Don't know if you know it, CSA. Here in Lavras, we funded one. We funded one in 2017 here with two farmers, and now we have about 50 families that are the prosumers of the collective.
So
It's just that.
So you said that prosumer of a CSA
Zaga, em português, we call coprodutor ou co-agricultor, co-farmer.
So like from a cooperative or?
Yes. Yeah, we buy, we pay in advance the farmers for a weekly basket of products, like mostly vegetables, but we receive every week a basket of vegetables, and but we pay in advance. And if the farmer has any problem or anything, we continue to pay, and but we may not receive, but we join the farmer in, both at the risk and the benefits of the farming. So it's like a community supported agriculture.
Oh, that's great. By the way, Thiago, did you get to know at GitHub project that how is leading and so on?
Yes, I was watching I believe that was the first meeting where Raul was explaining at GitHub and ethics, and I finished the second meeting, and I was about to look into the stock and flow and the ethics, Humu and the other that I forgot the name. But I was sort of understanding the functioning and all the diagrams.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you are immersed in that. I think that this will help a lot because I mean there is a lot natural synergy in there to be explored.
Sure.
But anyway, moving on. And you, Xavier, how has been the week? Something interesting that you learned? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I worked a bit more on the CAD course, and I participated the first meeting of the Omnipool project. It was a very interesting meeting. The project will start with a study program that will help me a lot. I think I am starting to understand how the AMN works and the difference between Uniswap and HydraDX. And I was this.
Yeah, and it's always useful to think that, let's say, in the end, EMM, they are really about, let's say, automated markets, in the sense that you can have any designing. You have examples, you have certain design options, but in the end, you could do anything. For example, there are EMMs. What's the name of that stablecoin EMM again? I think Curve. Yeah, I need to say exactly, but there are EMMs for that do not use, for example, Bunding Curve. It's an interesting concept, but just because almost everyone uses doesn't mean that it's universal. So we have instances, for example, of other projects that, let's say, take into account other considerations, sometimes some fairness considerations in order to set the price. So yeah, just some food for thought. And what were your impressions about the HydraDX group? I was talking with Angela yesterday, and she said that was going to be very structured, so perhaps, but yeah, I would like to know your impressions overall about the first meeting. Yeah, perhaps it was too much of an open question, but I think that we could move on. Until Danilo, how has been your week? What have you learned? How you interact with tokens and crypto last week?
So I changed place so the audio doesn't interfere. This last week was very hot. I've been exercising a lot, trying to follow Danilo around on his resting resting intensity. Danilo has 4 intensity, and on his resting intensity, I'm trying to follow him, and for me, it's been quite an exercise. In terms of crypto, I've been following a lot of NFTs, and I also been looking into how to bring blockchain for real use cases. And I think we are in a prime position to do that because we've been developing some things, and now we can try out like different tokens, different stimulus. And yeah, my week was amazing being with you, learning a lot. We discussed a lot of things that we could be doing through the record, like creating a token to give to people who eat in vegetarian restaurants, and making an NFT for the record. And so we've been discussing a lot of things. In terms of modeling, I haven't practiced myself, but I have been learning a lot from you, from seeing the things that you're doing, especially the how do you say in English, the unemployment rate versus the price of the labor. That was really interesting for me. So yeah, my week has been with a lot of exercise and learning a lot of new things. Thanks to you.
Just for the context, that unemployment thing, I think that I have already referenced sometimes on this meeting about the Shapiro-Stiglitz theory. So I was bored when I was on the airplane here to the Amazon. So I got the computer on the airplane, and I did create a CAD model for simulated dynamics of the labor market. It's a simple, well, I wouldn't say simple because it's a bit complex, but I would say that it's, yeah, it's a relatively simple model, but it does capture, let's say, the effect of the efficiency wages, in the sense that, for example, you can have a labor market where you have a market wage, but you can also have a critical wage where people are going to shirk if their wage is below the critical wage. And I was interested in knowing, let's say, the exact dynamics of it. So I built a CAD model. If you guys are interested, I could do a walkthrough, but I don't know if it's the priority, but we could. But if there is a high interest, we could go over through it. And it's a very interesting model. It gives some pretty interesting insights in terms of non-trivial dynamics. Like, for example, fear of unemployment making the employment converging faster, but at the same time, the fact that you have converging employment, you have co-employment faster, drives to bargaining positions, and therefore, fear of unemployment leads to, let's say, higher wages. It's a non-trivial dynamic. We could go over through it. I want to be making a strong claim about that because it's a simplified model, and there are a lot of holes in there. So just because I'm telling that the model is saying that, this is by no means objective truth. It just says that on the correct parameterization, that's what happens. And yeah, well, I'm sort of already my turn, so I've already given a spoiler of what I did last week. And of course, I'm always doing lots of things on crypto because, by the way, probably in October, we're going to have some interesting research groups on token engineering cadre. I'm sort of negotiating so that we have some examples of some research groups around CAD operational models. Because most of the time, CAD is used for informing design work. It's used for informing, I mean, you have a model of how the dynamics should play, and you use that just to know, let's say, how the hypothetical dynamic could go through the time. But there is another user case that has been not so much explored, which is about taking a huge system that already exists and using the CAD model as a, let's say, as a way of embedding context when you are creating, for example, behavioral models. Because, for example, suppose that we have a system that we want, for example, to project something of the future, like the price or the volume, or maybe some kind of sustainability metric. Most of the data analysts and scientists, they are going to approach that by simply taking a black box model, fit, and hope that everything is going to be all right. And this is a bit problematic because it is hard to you to make sense, for example, if you want to change something on the system. You don't know what's going to happen if you do intervention into feature. Using CAD as a representation, allows you to, let's say, to embed a bit of context-dependent knowledge when you do those kinds of extrapolations. We're going to delve into that topic at some point in time, but it's just a spoiler for now. I'm going to go away here from because it was, yeah. But yeah, that's from my side. Andy, how has been your week? Something that you learned?
Yeah, a lot of things to do, but also I tried to put all the model, the Kumu thing into Insight Maker, and I realized there are too many things. I'm not really sure which ones are variables, which ones are stocks, and which ones are agents. So then I say, like, okay, let's simplify. I tried to do two things. I'm going to share screen 1 second. Maybe like I run into problems because I think I think as a programmer and not as a modeler. But for example, I tried to, okay, let's model just the part of buying bonds. And I had problems. I tried to do an agent here, but apparently flows cannot be connected to an agent. So in Insight Maker, I don't know how to have like agent-based models where basically you are moving to transition, and the examples they are like, I don't know, something running away from, in a 2D field, running away from a danger or something. But I didn't know how to do, like, for example, an agent that at some point will trigger a change in a flow. So I say, like, okay, I'm going to try to do it even more simple, and I try to model. We were looking into different primitives and what can we use that exist to model our market. And for example, Cashi lending. I don't know if this is a sushi swap. It's like Aave, but for individual models. So it's going to be a permissionless lending market. So it's could be the base for our thing, because you already have, like, if there is a market where the collateral, you can create here you can create your own part, so you can put our token as collateral and have an agent that is trying to have those positions not liquidate for the farmers, and the asset could be DAI. So if people get enough of our ethics to create a position, they can borrow from this pool. So I was trying to just recreate the basic Insight Maker, that, like, basically Cashi lending, but I was just reading the smart contracts, and there is a lot of variables. I'm struggling a little with the language on how to represent flows. So I don't know if I should keep investing into doing it here, or probably in CAD it will be faster for me, but I don't know. What do you think? Or maybe there is here more, because in CAD the agents, I see easier how can I especially the temporal dynamics, how can I program them, but here is a bit more confusing for me. Like, for example, if you have how do you represent a steady flow of people depositing into a market? Or do you have to have several agents? Do you have to maybe just put a delay, like every, I don't know, let's suppose every month people deploy and deposit X money, or this is where I stop.
Yeah. So it's never quite trivial how to implement a model. And actually, I think it's going to be very convenient because one of the topics that I put for today, and we're going to go over it shortly, is about mathematical specification. Because on a lot of engineering design process, the thing that you do before creating a computational model is specify exactly, let's say, how you represent the variables. Like, for example, we had that token flow diagram. You can always think each stock as being essentially two things. You could think as being, let's say, as the set of agents, but you can also think as also being an aggregate over the agents. And maybe those relationships, giving a name to them, specify their properties, a lot of times helps a lot when trying to think how you could represent by code. Especially because when you do code, first is not necessarily you need to capture outer elements of the system in order to represent at least part of it. So by having a specification, it makes it a bit easier to you to, let's say, to make the design choices. And another thing is that for a lot of goals, you don't need exactly agent-based models. It may be that, for example, just having aggregate representation, but that makes use of, let's say, relationships that make sense, that are consistent with the agent's properties. It may be that having an aggregate model is more helpful. And sometimes I even joke with some friends because, I mean, probably you guys are going to notice with time that I'm somewhat biased towards against agent-based models, but this is another topic. But the thing is that, let's say, having that specification allows us to, let's say, to decide also how much we are, for example, gaining or losing by having, for example, just a stock and flow representation or just or agent-based model, especially because the relationships on the aggregate one, the ones that are simply stock and flow, sometimes you can have associations that, let's say, make uses of some heuristics that can, let's say, get the fundamentals of the agent interactions. About, let's say, one thing that I also notice a lot is that for a lot of people use because agent-based models, I think that in general they are more intuitive in the sense that you can relate better. Because I mean, every one of us is an agent. So when we are interacting with a system, it's usually easier to relate to the fact that, let's say, we are taking actions as agents. So what I mean is that, yeah, there is that trick that sometimes, that tricky part that sometimes it's easier to think about agent-based model, but when you go to the implementation, it can be difficult to, let's say, to get to know how you are going to create KPIs based on that. Another thought is that there is one lemma that I say that the more complex your model is going to be, the more you are going to gain with CAD. So my impression is that, for example, in SiteMaker, if you are doing a stock and flow model or some stock and flow model that doesn't have interactions that are not super complex, or you don't require, for example, data integration or complicated behavior, SiteMaker is going to be fine. But as you try to add, let's say, more rows, as you try to, let's say, get more nuanced behavior, it is usually best to go to a code-based framework like CAD, because code, at least, it's not that code can be convoluted, but at least code, I mean, code is more suitable for complex projects. So, yeah. And actually, yeah, so those are some thoughts. So, for example, if you go, for example, through an aggregate formalism, so that, let's say, instead of having an agent-based model, you have stock and flows, but that, let's say, do have relationships that they are consistent with the agent behavior, probably SiteMaker is going to be fine. But if you do agent-based modeling, it may happen that CAD is going to provide you more flexibility in terms of defining how the agents should act, how you initialize them, and also, I mean, all kinds of things that you could do straightforward with code.
Yeah, just one example or question. If you go to this Kubo, just for this loop, this one is the one I try to do, just people that stake or unstake. So this is more than one agent, because there's a lot of behavior on how people will stake, how people want on stake. Especially if there is fixed interest, that you can only stake if you have enough money, and you can stake in certain periods. So just this loop is not this loop. There is a lot of kind of loops. If doing it just with flows is maybe too much of a generalization, but maybe it's just useful to start with that, and then depending on the question, you can fine tune or something. So I don't know. It was like, okay, it's just for this loop. I don't know how to start, or like there is too many variables in my mind on how can this go.
Yeah. So what happens?
I have the same doubt how to model reinforcement loops.
Yeah. So maybe it's worth to have a. So what happens is that sometimes it's useful to think maybe into spaces. Let's say there is the action space and there is the behavioral space. That diagram that you have shown from Kumu is the action space. In the sense that, let's say, they are the admissible actions. They are the actions that you could do or do not do. But what triggers the action? So what triggers the action, it's another story. It's more of a behavioral thing. In the sense that, let's say, what motivates someone to stake? So understanding the difference between action and behavior, it's important because modeling behavior is different from modeling the admissible actions. And not only that, but also the feedback loops on the behavioral space, they are also different. So, for example, when you try if you, for example, create a model, let's say, usually there is one thing that I do a lot on CAD models that is essentially to create, let's say, two sections on CAD model. There is the mechanism block section and there is the behavioral section. On the mechanism section, essentially I'm encoding, let's say, if an agent takes an action, or maybe it's not even an agent, it's actually, let's say, the aggregated agents. Let's say it's not an agent that has decided to stake. It's actually, let's say, the pool of agents that has decided to stake. That would be another way of seeing that. So staking and staking, they are actions, and they need to be decoded, because when you take that action, you are going to interfere with the system. Maybe that staking and staking is simply adding or removing balance on the pool, but it may be that by tweaking the pool, you are also triggering other things, like, for example, maybe increasing the credit limit for farmers, or maybe, so let's say the sequence of actions, they are, let's say, they are related to this action space, to this mechanism representation. But the mechanism only reacts. The mechanism doesn't do any, I mean, it executes a sequence of orders provided an order, but you need to drive that. You need to, let's say, have something that tells, oh, go on stake. So that's the behavioral space.
So for example, it will be like in balanced simulation, the mechanism clearly is the AMM equation. Like if someone swaps, this is what is going to happen. Then why someone swaps is behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the mechanism space. And the behavioral space would be, for example, suppose that you have someone that, let's say, wants to maximize profit, or maybe wants to, let's say, rebalance their portfolio so that they minimize some kind of metric. Or suppose that they do have information asymmetry. I mean, and the thing about behavioral space is they are sort of, I wouldn't say arbitrary, but they do have, let's say, a lot of room of how you could define them, in the sense that usually the way that you go forward is going iteratively. Like, for example, if you have, for example, the mechanism space model, if you have a CAD representation of the mechanism, or maybe having a site maker representation of the mechanism, you could do tests. Like, for example, what happens if an investor stakes a certain amount? What's going to happen after that? So that's one test. Second test is, what if an investor stake and a second investor on stake? That's another test. And then you could think about, oh, what if actually the investors, they are cyclical? They have those cycles of investing, and they investing, and this is a senoid. You could also do that. Or what if the investors actually, let's say, they are exposed to maybe the market price of some commodity, and so you could also scrap data from commodities, and so defining the behavioral space, they are somewhat subjective in the sense that you could do anything, but it's not completely handled in the sense that you can select the signals that, for example, you have reason to think that it's representative. Maybe it's not representative of the all history, but it can be representative of, let's say, of some edge cases or some shock scenarios, or maybe a specific point in time, like, for example, the growth period of the system.
So in our cases, like, we need the mechanism first, for sure.
Yeah, let's say one way of going, there are several ways of doing that. It really depends a bit on the priorities, like time frame, but for example, one strategy would be, for example, first you write a mathematical specification of the mechanisms. Let's say you have this stock and flow diagram that you have all those actions, and you describe mathematically what each action do. And by having a mathematical description of what each action do and what it, let's say, triggers over the overall system, you are ready to, let's say, to start coding the mechanism space. So that you have CAD model that represents if you do action, what's going to happen, what's going to cascade. That's one approach. And once you have that, you can start thinking about, let's say, oh, what if I put a policy here so that I simulate the effect of early investors or cyclical investors or people, or maybe there is a crisis in between. But a lot of times it's useful to have, let's say, that idea of you diagram the actions, you specify the actions, you encode the mechanism states, and you then start to, let's say, create tests. First, you start with simple tests, and then you move towards more complex tests. That's one way of approaching, but that's not the only way. There are other ways too. Like, for example, it can be, for example, that you are not interested, for example, in understanding everything on the system. It may be that you are only interested, for example, in just one point. Like, maybe you only care about one specific mechanism. So it can be worth, for example, maybe encode just that portion, doing specific tests to that. And also, it's always useful also to think about the research questions, because, for example, for a lot of problems and questions, because, let's say, when you specify the actions, you need to specify on an agent level mathematically. But usually, agent-based models, they are more complicated to, let's say, to do experiments. They are more complex to define KPIs. They are more complex to, let's say, try to think about different functional forms of what's going to happen. It's harder to specify tests for the agents. So on a lot of instances, let's say, having an aggregated model is way, way easier to implement, and it's way easier also to perform science.
But here, the KPI and the test will be like, how can the agents break the mechanism? Like, you know, how will the mechanism hold against certain types of agent, I guess? So
it also helps to, let's say, because, for example, first you need to have it very explicit what is to break the mechanism. Because break the mechanism is what? Is volatility? Is stock going out? Because when we perform a stock and flow diagram and we specify mathematically, what happens is that we do have, let's say, some conditions in order to the stock and flow to have consistency. There are some flows that, let's say, you do have mathematical forms for them, and you have constraints on them. And not only that, but you can specify constraints so that, let's say, some aspects of that is always enforced. So the thing is that, let's say, it's important to specify what do you think it's to break, because, yeah, because just by having that stock and flow, I mean, at least you are ensuring that, let's say, if you specify that mathematically and you get, for example, the lines of motion, there are some things that are always going to be the same. So And by the way, on a lot of projects, start design part of specify mathematically and getting the stock and flow constants and making sure that the constant is, for example, have some functional form. Usually it takes a lot of time because one thing that people do a lot is instead of, let's say, designing a system and then, let's say, seeing if, for example, some can break, a lot of the times the goal is to design out the possibility of someone breaking. Let's say it's impossible to break by designing, in the sense that it's not even admissible. It's impossible to do an action that breaks. And of course, defining this depends a bit on also what you consider break, but the first starting point is to make sure that the stock and flow relationships are consistent. Yeah. So yeah, as I said to you guys, I want to do a mathematical specification exercise so that you guys know how the process works and so on. Do you have any questions about anything? I mean, anything beside that? Because we didn't go over this because we have this hit. So yeah. So I'm going to propose them that we open the common stock and flow. I'm going also to open HackMD. And I'm going to sort of walk through, let's say, how I would proceed, for example, to doing some specification data and perhaps how we could use it. So I'll share my screen here. Let me, okay. So I'm going to put here HackMD on the left and also the Como here on the right. Let me see, where is the Como? Oh, here, ethic is cool. And I'm going also to create a new HackMD here at the Igaratá page. I'm going to send on the chat. And then we could, if you guys want, you could even go on the HackMD together. Maybe even help you feel if you guys feel. So sending here. Also, I'm going to set here for sharing for everyone. Oh, it's already. So it's for everyone to write. So you're super welcome to, co-write that together with me. So this is, let's say, the math spec for ethics, stock, and flow. So I'm going to show, as I said, the process that I would go over it. So one thing that is helpful for doing a mathematical specification is because on stock and flow formalism, there are some consistency equations that must always hold. The fundamental equation is, let's say, everything that is going. If you think about those stocks here, the green ones. Let me see. Oh, because we have here the humans. But for example, if you think that ethics, for example, has a limited supply, all the ethics that exist, they must flow from those blue boxes here. So let's say every exchange that we have anywhere, you must always have that constraint that, let's say, for example, if I remove ethics from the auditors, then it must go somewhere. It must go to the auditor pools, for example. But if it does not go entirely to the auditor pools, then it must go to another place, like, for example, the EMM. So that's one thing that, let's say, helps a bit specifying. Another one is also to think about, let's say, what are the agent's actions? So I think that we have those two strategies that we could use for bootstrapping, the consistency equations and the admissible actions. Maybe it's more intuitive to think about the actions, because I think that for building any kind of computational representation, I think that could help a bit. So the way that I would put is that, let's say, any system could compose, for example, of agent's state. There is also, let's say, a global state. We also have global parameters and agent agent's parameters. So that would be one way of putting. So the global state are things that relate to the entire system here. And the agents one, they would be related, for example, so agent in that case here, agent would be human. So the agent, he could have several actions. So you could, in terms of admissible actions, even though we have, for example, compensators as humans, cover investors as humans, ethics team fund as humans, it's important to think about, let's say, what distinguishes them in terms of what is admissible or not. Because, for example, the originators, could the originator could be also an auditor? If they cannot be, on what conditions they can or cannot be? So it's always worth to think about those things. For simplicity purposes, I'm going to simply suppose that anyone can be any of those classes of agents, because perhaps this will make it a bit simpler. So the admissible human actions here is, let's list them. Could be, let's say, stake, unstake, compensation pool. Actually, I'm going to just state, actually agent action. So stake and stake on compensation pool. And there is the staking cover pool. So there is that flow here, stake on stake. Let's see. There is this compensators incentive here, which it's not an agent action, it's actually a, let's say, a mechanism action. So compensator incentive. We have also the originator incentive. There is this one from auditor, so we could think about, I guess this is stake on stake. And given that we have autos differentiate between ethics and DAI, we could also create a subsection here that relates to ethics. So related to ethics. There is also stake on stake ethic, and also there is the ethics yield. So there is is also retrieve ethics yield. And there is, I'm going to guess that those are the semi-actions. There is also the fees here, which is a mechanism action. So, no, actually this is DAI. So, related to DAI. Compensator fee pay. So this is an important distinction between mechanism actions and agent actions, because mechanism actions, they are, I mean, they are simply mechanisms. You wouldn't treat them as agents in any case. We also have here, let's say, those flows here about liquidation. So we could think here about another mechanism action related to DAI, yeah, to ethics, which is liquidate to DAI. There is also another one is originators buy for staking, which is would be originate. I'm going to call that block for originators. So let me see. there is also those ones here. So maybe it's worth it right now to focus on ethics because if not, we are going to introduce complexity. But interesting challenge for you guys would be exactly to, let's say, to fill in, but with DAI and also local currency. The thing is that, let's say, giving out those actions, there is a constraint that we must hold that, let's say, all of those actions, they must always be consistent with the stock and flow equations. In the sense that, let's say, the ethics supply must never change unless you meet them. And by the way, this is an interesting question because, for example, how do we meet ethics? Do you have an answer, Raul?
There is a fixed supply. The contract is upgradable, but ideally we don't meet ethics. We have release a schedule for the incentive tokens that are going to be invested in a linear fashion. Well, they do like this. So, and they can be assigned by the DAO to, for example, right now they are incentivizing liquidity providing in Uniswap or staking on ethics in compensation pool, but we want to use them for incentivizing lending, for example. Or more than minting is we can assign reserves to incentivize specific actions, but the idea is to have a limited supply. Okay, also, so half of the supply is staked as this safety mechanism, so we could use it maybe to, if the price is falling down, and instead of liquidate originators because of volatility, we could play with these 50 million tokens to, help stabilize that.
Yeah, but what do you say that, for example, this stabilization mechanism? Right now, do we envision that as, let's say, as automated reaction in the sense that we do have, for example, a mechanism for that, or it's going to be, for example, decided on based on governance, based on, for example, sporadical decision making?
This is a good question. What would be more effective? I mean, personally, I would prefer to have an automated thing that has like a ideal collateralization ratio or something that is trying to fix that. Because governance, if it's something like something happened like a black swan event or something, governance is going to be reacting after the fact. Mm-hmm. So maybe, if you want to keep it 300% collateralized, just throwing a number, maybe having some kind of mechanism that help with that, or even incentivization of, if you stake, like we will give you more tokens if you stake or to cover this or something like that. But in this case, I think it will be, but this is just like a personal assumptions. I think it will be better if there is the system can react to that and incentivize, more automated than waiting for governance. But not really. This is just like a subjective impression.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. For now, I'm going to simply assume that there is a mechanism action related to governance events that, I mean, if you have an event, you can, for example, decide, for example, for a new release schedule or for some kind of action based on those governance events. I think that's fine for now.
Okay.
And that release schedule, is it defined a priori or?
No, we already have it's defined. It's in the docs, so it's already like it's over several years how the tokens are going to be invested from the reserves. So that one is already fixed.
Yeah, and that release schedule is directed towards, for example, towards agents or towards, for example, T-pools?
Right now they're releasing to what we call incentive reserve, and governance will decide what to do with that.
Okay. And so that's a question, because, for example, one thing that is always interesting to think about is about the initialization, because as I understand, the system is going to be initialized with pools with no reserves. The agent is going to start with no reserves, and everything is on that reserve that should be defined by the governance.
It's already. I mean, we have to migrate the liquidity from, for example, from Balancer 1 to version 2 and for Uniswap, but we already have some reserves.
Okay. Yeah.
So the data on how is that is, I can share the link probably for the.
Yeah, because, for example, if the reserves are on Balancer, then the only admissible action here would be for example, yeah, it would need to go on the originator scope.
I mean, what we did was basically have a pool in Balancer to start, distributing our tokens. Is 10% DAI, 90% our token, and has certain reserves. We also open a market in Uniswap. But
yeah, I just noticed that there is a missing loop here, actually. The missing loop is that the agents, they can consume from the Balancer EMM. So I would say I would consider that the natural loop perhaps would be we start with the EMM Balancer, and from the EMM, this is going to flow towards the agents, and those agents could take those actions here.
I think some of it will be from the incentives pool, would be more the flow. The Balancer thing, how it stands at the moment is not fixed. I think most of the liquidity we put ourselves, so we still have some room to have a different pool with different, like parameters. So
yeah, I just noticed here that there is a dedicated fund providing a flow for the incentives pool. So we should capture that. Let me see how. I'm not sure exactly. I'm going to call that the incentives flow. So, okay, we have a set of actions, and there are some consistency in the sense that, for example, if you think about the compensation pool, the sum of stake, unstake, and liquidation over all the history must be equal to the pool at any point in time. So this is an invariant in the sense that, for example, we could think something like that. Let's say we could, for example, create here, let's say stake is, let's say, math here. So it would be, let me see, what could be a good letter here? It would be delta CP plus. And the stake would be, for example, delta CP and minus. And the liquidation would be delta CP. This generates a basic invariant that is the following. Let's say, and also, I'm going to hit it. So stock CP. So let's say the CP at any point in time must be equal to the sum of delta CPs at all times. So I'm going to, actually I'm going to put on the hybrid mode so that we can see the LaTeX. So what I tell here is that, let's say, the compensation pool amount must be equal to the sum of, let's say, of all the stakes minus the sum of all the, let me put here, CP, delta CP, CP minus over time, plus Alte, or actually minus Alte liquidation events. Actually, CP, maybe it's not a good one. I'm going to use another one. So pool, I'm going to put here a superscript, actually. I think that perhaps this is a little better. So PCP minus and PCL. Okay, so we have the swap. Let's say we have a symbol here for the swap action, another symbol for the on-stake action, the compensation pool, and another one for the liquidation. And we could write here, let's say the liquidation pool on time t as being the sum over tau. So tau here is, let's say, it's the past events. They are, let's say, all the events on the past. Delta PC plus on tau. And we do the same thing for the other ones. So this one is going to be L, and it's going to be a minus sign. This is going to be a minus sign, and this is going to be minus. And we could even do, let's say, define also two dimensions. So the stake must be always a real number, for example. Not only it's a real number, but it also should be positive. The on-stake should be always a negative number. And the liquidation should, actually, they should be positive numbers, because the way that I have defined here below, they should be, so yeah, we have those three actions here. Those actions are essentially numbers. And this is what makes the compensation pool stock at any point in time. So this can be seen a bit trivial, but the main point is that, for example, if we do the other things, for example, the other pools, there is one thing that, let's say, if we think about the stock and flow consistent equations, we should have the following relationship. So stock and flow consistency equations. There is a relationship that must be always hold. And when we think about, for example, because when we do a system designs, sometimes we want to condition so that, for example, those actions, they cannot simply be any number. It may be that we want to condition those numbers so that we want to incentivize certain kinds of behaviors. Because we can't, that's one of the things. They can be any number, but we can specify the subset way that the action can hold. And they can be anything provided that, let's say, the stock and flow consistent equations are valid. So, for example, in that case, let me put here some symbols. So the compensation pool here would be the PC. So there is the cover pool. So this is going to be the yeah, not the PC. I'm going to call that PO for now. PA. Oh, PO.
In this model, sorry, what is the cover pool that is not the compensation pool?
So the cover pool is this one here. I was just following the stock and flow diagram, so I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, this is everything in ethics.
Mm-hmm.
We're only focusing on ethics right now.
Yeah, I don't know. Looking at the diagram again, I'm not really sure what is the difference between compensation and cover.
What do you say that they are the same thing?
Maybe, I don't know, Danilo, can you remember why there's a difference between cover and compensation? Cover pool and compensation pool. What are the difference here in this?
Cover pool. I think I don't remember right now. Auditor. I think it's because there was the compensation, and there was something that to cover the compensation or something like that, or the compensate, like the liquidation 3 would come before the liquidation 4. I remember, I think there was something like there is the
Yeah,
ethics,
there
and then there
are,
is the team ethics also, like even one level
in the
more.
liquidations, there are orders. Like first, it will be like the originator
Yeah.
ethics stake that are burned, then the the auditor, and then the community. And then there is like the general compensation pool. But I don't know if we can model that like a.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just put that because I remember that I think there was different layers and it was in order. But if the name is wrong, please correct. Like
No,
I did it, and
naming is the hardest part on everything, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, maybe this is to reflect like, yeah, first the originator is going to be burned, then the auditor that allowed that originator to, you know,
Yeah.
start in the platform, then the community one.
Yeah. Let's do the following, because I just noticed that we are sort of blowing the time. I just want to show, let's say, an example of a stock and flow consistent equations. And that also not take over exists for now. We can adjust that later. So we have the originator pools and we have the incentive pools and the EMM. So let me put here. So yeah. So for example, the stock and flow consistency equation, it tells essentially that, let's say, the balances across all stocks of ethics must be equal to the supply that's circulating. So that would be actually that. So let's see, PC plus PVT plus PAT plus POT plus PET plus EMM plus agents balance minus circulating in supply equals T must be equal to 0. I'm going to call that TB and CS. I'm going to put here, so for example, E there is a TB. Actually, there is another way of putting ATB, which is that it's going to be sum over balance E. I think this is more intuitive because yeah, so those are the, let's say, the stock and flow consistency equations. Let's say the sum of all pools plus the sum over the ethics on EMM plus the balance over all agents balance minus the circulating supply must be equal 0. If the system does not hold that for any reason, something is going to break. I think this is, let's say, one of the most basic things. And this is interesting because by having that, let's say, this can be a constraint that, for example, suppose that we want to condition the stake on the stock of, let's say, on the stock of the compensation pool, or maybe the stock of the originators. We can always use that constraint, that equation here to, let's say, to help inform us, let's say, what could be an upper bound or a lower bound. We could also think about other, let's say, other constraints, like, for example, maybe we want to minimize or maximize some property. So the idea is that a lot of time is designing systems involves, let's say, finding what are the constraints that we want to enforce. Based on those constraints, we can search, for example, for, let's say, what are the, let's say, admissible set of the actions? Because it may be that, for example, even though state can be anything, it could be that for some reason, once we enforce the constraints, the delta PC plus M actually should be an action that, let's say, maybe it's related to, maybe it should be, let's say, less than, for example, I don't know, maybe PCT divided by maybe the circulating supply. So doing a specification of the actions and also some of the constraints that we want to enforce, they iteratively helps us to, let's say, to helps us design our models. The thing is that, let's say, describing those actions here, in a sense, any agent can enforce those actions, but there is also the fact that another stock and flow consistency equation that we could think about is that one, for example. So let's say BET should be equal to 0. This is a simple, very simple equation. Or actually, it should be greater or equal to. Okay, it's not working. So, for example, this provides, for example, another action in the sense that if this equation holds, then you could also give other constraints, like, for example, let's say. Well, I'll formulate a bit about that on the next session. But yeah, I just wanted to get you guys started on that. Before jumping in, because we have already blown up our time, do you guys have any quick question before we jump off?
Where do you think that, for example, the formulas for the interest or the utilization ratio or all that thing should be placed?
So the interest rate, there are some ways of approaching that. Because one thing about stock and flow is that one problem with interest rates is that if you are not careful, the stocks are going to blow somewhere, in the sense that either you are going to need to mint token in order to compensate the interest rates, or either you need to, let's say, you need to generate flow from somewhere. So if you generate flow from somewhere, it can be very complicated to, let's say, to have, for example, a fixed interest rate. Because if so, eventually some kind of pool are going to dry and you are not going to be able to make flows. In that case, what you could do, for example, is to simply mint from somewhere. So this is an important consideration because, given the stock and flow consistency equations, all flows must come from somewhere. Either if you are not minting, then it must come from somewhere.
Yeah. But in case of DAI,
DAI.
It could happen, yes.
Yeah, so a lot of systems, DAI, I think, because DAI, they do have that collateralization scheme and so on, but that's another thing, because, for example, there are some design choices that sometimes what matters is not, let's say, having the volume according to the realized price, but rather, what are the dynamics behind the realized price? In the sense that, for example, on DAI, if everyone withdraw DAI, interest rates are going to... So that's the same thing about Bundy curves in general. Bundy curves, just because you have lots of value locked on Bundy curve, it doesn't mean that, let's say, everyone can withdraw at the same value. So
you can have bank runs or events where liquidity is not there or something.
Yeah, a lot of times, for example, design considerations, it's really about, for example, how you could, for example, make the dynamic evolution in a way that, for example, maybe make the price less volatile, or maybe it can take volatility, but in a way that people can stomach. So yeah, but one thing is sure, you always need to make sure that those constraints are held. If not, you are minting or burning somewhere. And if you are minting or burning somewhere, the protocol is going to break at some point. Like the pool simply doesn't have stock in order to, let's say, make the agents interact. I mean, that's the one desirable properties, because one of the reasons of why people trust crypto in general is that they have this implicit trust that, let's say, you can always interact with the mechanism. The mechanism is not going to throw you an error.
It's debatable how realistic is that, given past events in a lot of protocols, but you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what are what do we have to do for next week? What are the assignments?
So assignments, one challenge that you could do, I have started at this HackMD. Perhaps a challenge would be to, let's say, go over the, fill in with the actions, let's say, fill in the stake and stake, write the consistency equation. So, for example, what's the consistency equation, for example, if I agent does stake? It's a very simple one. But I think it's an interesting exercise because, for example, maybe next week we could play around, for example, thinking about how we could, for example, enforce some constraints. Like, for example, if we do have action, for example, that you have an interest rate, we have a functional form that the compensation depends on interest rate. What do we need to do in order to be consistent with the stock and flow? So perhaps that could be one thing. And yeah, if you guys also want to, another challenge, it's a bit not related to the topic of today, but it's a bit. We have, for instance, we have this diagram about the action space. But how would a behavioral space diagram look like? So this is an open challenge. Maybe we could also go over this next week about how we could make the behavioral space surround a given set of actions. This could be a topic.
Do you have any examples of behavioral space diagrams?
So behavioral space, usually we go over it through causal loop diagrams. In the sense that, for example, you have a certain kind of stakeholder and you have an action, and you need to identify what causes the actor to take the action. Like, for example, maybe token price, maybe... I could try to search if I have any concrete example of that.
Should we all try to fill this HackMD? Should we coordinate to make it together?
Yeah, I think that we could use the HackMD that has been created. I'm going to put on the log the link for it. So yeah, it's already there.
Are you on the Discord too, Tiago? Or?
So we have that channel on Discord, the TB, it's on the Token Engineering Commons. Tiago.
No, I mean,
Okay.
Should we communicate in the Igaratá Discord and the Token Engineering Commons? Or?
Yeah, I think that we should center the discussion of the Token Engineering Commons because it's more connected to the community. So yeah.
I have to go now because I have another meeting. But thank you and see you in Discord.
I need to leave too. I have another meet, okay? See you guys. Bye.
Yeah, see you guys. So yeah, until next week then. We'll keep chatting. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.